Hello, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. I'm going to do a 5 minute per side per game. I'm pretty sure we're also going to break into 10 minute per side per games later on. Okay. All right. Finish this. Finish this game against computer. It's a good game. Uh, it's a good game. 22 moves. And this one's, I think, 30 some moves. Some misses here. White had this miss. Queen to E3, queen takes E3. Moderate sized miss. And then some of these other ones came quite near the end. I count white as having 3 misses. 1, 2, move 12, move 15, and move 35. And it said here 4 misses though. There's only 3 shown here. Well, stop. 1, 2, how about queen e4? So that escaped my view last time, I guess. Maybe I missed that. Not all that big. Okay. So white had 4 misses, none of which were all that earth-shattering. 4 lines at 3 seconds each. Notice that my opponent and I are both relying on pawn play. Here at the end of move 7 even, my opponent has used pawns and only pawns, which leaves his back rank undeveloped. I've used a number of pawn moves myself, as many as 5. Or this is after move 6, so sorry. My opponent has made 6 pawn moves. I've made 4, and no, 3, because 1 and then another, and 1 over to here. So I have a lead in development. I found as a matter of practice. So here in the book move here, I'm pretty sure would be either back to F3 if we're even if book's even open, or to B3. Let's check out book and see what how the explorer treats this particular position. We have a few hundred games open at this point. And the only game played with after the move E5 is this game here, knight to B3. Now that's of master games. We keep in mind that's of master games. I think this is sort of the move that's in keeping more with book. Oftentimes, when the G1 knight starts to go on some sort of a adventure early on, he'll find home on B3 next to his fellow knight. And actually, the contrapositive is true. When the C3 knight goes on some sort of dance early on, he'll often, maybe not at D1, that's a little weird, but he'll often find himself moving to G3 next to, guess who, his fellow knight. This is sort of a good refueling station for knights on the other leg of the trip, so to speak. So knight to B3 would have been fine here too. I mean, from a tactical standpoint, I'm sure that's what Torch recommends here. Let's see. Oh, we have to get there. Make a few moves. Pardon me. So Torch likes, yeah. So knight to B3 is up there. These moves are all pretty close. Look, 0.69. Let's call it 0.7 to 0.9. These moves are all good, viable, strong moves. They all involve this knight moving out of the way of danger, in one way or another. So knight to B3 makes a lot of sense. I just had this. Yeah, I'm surprised that there's only one game in the database like that, but that's how chess is. We're not even 10 moves in, and it's a new position. See, if we go to other players, does it specify which player? I just wanted all games by any other player is what really I'm looking for. Okay, well maybe that'll be something that I'll try later. Back to my game. I played knight to f5, which kind of exposes, I think, to some extent why e5 wasn't black's best move. In addition, I found in practice, and practically speaking, where else can we go with this? Pragmatics, and so on, that a knight on f5 is often kind of difficult for black to deal with. He can move bishop to e7, and I might choose to lop off this bishop. I might choose to play knight takes g7 check and be ahead a pawn, where I can almost always be able to also retreat, not retreat, but reconnoiter, and be safe with my knight, the king will have to move because no piece can capture the knight, and the king's in check by a knight. So this could be a knight on f5 strong. And so very often my opponents are capturing on f5, I recapture, and then here's the point. The pawn on f5 is not all that difficult. I'm sorry. The pawn on f5 is difficult to capture as well. With knight h6 and bishop takes h6, pawn takes h6. My pawn on f5 is still there. I've doubled black's pawns, made an active piece out of one off my back rank. The pawn on f5 is actually kind of a bugaboo. Queen could attack it on one of the light squares, and I'll defend. Bishop d3. In some cases where white would push g4 to support the f5 pawn. So, just a thing that happened that I thought was interesting. And white is playing the most accurate move over and over here. But most of these moves. Castle's queenside I thought was kind of the miss that made the game. People sometimes talk about the blunder or the miss that made the game. Castle's queenside was up there with as one like that. And we're noting, it's easier to note as an attacker that all this while the pawn on d6 is pinned to the defender's queen. If I'm pinning this pawn to d6, it's usually a lighter load mentally to pin a pawn than to have your pawn pinned and keep track of it. So what happens is people lose track of the fact that that pawn's pinned. They end up making mistakes that, somehow, how would we do this? Mistakes that somehow evidence that they weren't, that wasn't on their mind, and lose a queen for a rook and a knight, or sorry, a queen for a rook and a bishop. Knight d5. c4 is the main square in question is c4. Can white adequately defend c4 against black's onslaught here? Yeah, so this was so pawn to b4. Look, I don't like this move. This move by black to play pawn to b4. The whole point is the tension on c4. There's a strong tension. Everything hinges on c4, including the knight's being defended or not, and perhaps this knight's future. It's all about c4. So you don't just pass it by and give away control of c4 for this popcorn fart on c3. First of all, my rook has a lot of mobility on the third rank, but how about just c2? Now I'm not worried. You want this pawn on b5 to help batter down the door of white's defenses, not skirt by the chance to break free. So I'm very critical of pawn to b4. Rook to f3, and maybe black is trying to play consistently here, throw another pawn at it, but even with pawn to a4 and with a white refusal to capture, right? If I capture here, then maybe the queen comes to a4 and she's threatening pieces and pawns all over the place, right? But if I just, that was If I simply, as white here, if I refuse to capture after a move like a4, then a2 will keep the hold over c4 strong. Or a2, pawn to a4, any move by white, pawn takes b3, a takes b3, and white still has a very strong hold over c4. Now, that being said, there are holes like after these exchanges, maybe black will relinquish his attempts to unseat c4 and play maybe rook a8 coupled with uh, queen a6. A4 would be an idea, except that it's currently covered by the a2 knight at b3, if you will. And start something along the open a file. But that's a little ways down the line when you're facing queen takes f7 check, and then some mating net to evidence itself that soon thereafter. So this all goes back to a5 really, because a5 is a good move to try to make sense of b4, but b4 was a horrible move, so it might have been best not to make sense of it at all. Put your bishop to e7. If I capture, then the king's active, but at least there's some trade of material. Compare this bishop, not good, to this knight. Yes, right? My opponent captured on d5. This was a visual blunder. Seeing that they could capture on d5, because I can't capture back with the c pawn. There it is. I can't capture back with my c pawn. It's pinned to my king, but it's kind of like this, converse idea, contrapositive idea, whatever it is. I capture however it is. It works out that queen takes c8 check, and I've captured a stronger piece, so I'm up in material. And Torch says there's a mate in 13. Not that I usually solve mate in 13s. Don't get any crazy ideas, future Jordan. All right, so queen takes c8 check, and white's doing so well after black's queen is captured on d5. So it's like a visual blunder at the end there. Gathering the knight against a pin, even if it, as it so happened, led to the loss of a rook on c8. Did I play this to... I'm not sure if I played this game to checkmate. Let's do this. We'll play practice first computer. Almost. Okay. So reasonably accurate, reasonably strong game overall. Okay, let's play another game. We're going to play a game in 10 minutes per side per game. A little bit slower time settings. Give me some time to calculate middle game positions. Here we go. open win earlier. Our opponent moves to G8 soon on this part of the game. Just let him sit there for one white move, and that was it. So we're gonna wanna we're gonna practice out of both. We're gonna analyze the game, and I'll also practice from that. I think this is the same. Go back. We'll find it here. Here with white to move. Bishop takes G8, of course. Oh, whoops. Here with white to move. I will play this out as practice. Alright. White is just rolling. The winning idea here was to gang up on the black's only pawn, the e5 pawn. Solidify these pawns on the queen side and push through on the king side. Now, since queening would lose the newfound queen, we just make things happen on the queen side. Queen and checkmate. So that's one way. If I had spotted that move at that one point in time, what move would that have been? Probably in the 30s. Oh, right to it. King F3 was a horrible miss. Not just any kind of miss. This was a bad miss. The rook's just sitting there, guys. Alright, so I'm gonna take a quick break and then I'm gonna get some water and be back to talk about the game in just about a minute, if that. So my mom and I have an inside joke. She and I have watched shows like The Office, The West Wing, The Sopranos, Parks and Recreation. I think she and I have watched almost every episode of those shows together. Some of them I've watched on my own and we caught up or whatever it was. The point is, we watched a lot of television shows together, and we would always say, depending on the show, it was usually Oh, Fixer Upper is another one we would say. Uh, Tony meant for Tony Soprano, so we'd go watch The Sopranos. And West Wing was the West Wing. Mm, Fixer Upper, we always said Chip and Joe. One of us to the other, or the other of us to the one would say Chip and Joe. And the point is Chip and Joe, like as a question. Tony as a question, Chip and Joe. And it said, yeah, Chip and Joe. And I said, all right, when's good? And I said, get your water. So we say, get your water to each other. It means because ma couldn't watch a television show without water nearby. So sometimes when I'm going to get water, I'm thinking, get your water. I'll mention this to Ma that I let this known to the cyber world later tonight. She and I, we talk every day. I'm very close with my Ma. I love her very dearly, and I'll have to mention this to her. Get your water. That's a Gatorade bottle, but I filled it with water. Oh. All right, so this was a fantastic. What a crazy game of chess. What a wonderful, heart-trying, chest-thumping game of chess here that I ended out winning on a timeout in a 10-minute per side per game. Well, we've got some going over to do here, Lucy. This was the game as it was against, with finished against computer from the ending position, maybe? Let me get my ducks in a row here. This is the actual game. So we'll go through the actual game and maybe figure things out from there. The final position was here with black completely winning the board. Also in check while there was a timer. I did not have 54 seconds left, my friends. Did I? I thought I had fewer. What's going on with that? Okay, we might get to that later, but I suppose I had more time than I thought. Anyway, that's great because I was, moving piece back and forth. I think this chess player and I had played a game before this. Maybe that's when I had moved my king back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. When I had black, right? That's when I had black in this game. Yes. So in this game, I lost due to timeout. Just a bit first before we get too far into things. You can lose due to timeout if your opponent has enough force to theoretically force checkmate against you. If the game went all the way. So if it's just if your opponent has just a king and bishop, and your time expires, then you get a draw. You earn the draw by way of your opponent not having enough material. This is very important. It's the material. Okay, so as my opponent as here when my opponent timed out, I had a bishop and these pawns. Let's for just a sec. Let's say king. I had king and bishop, and these two pawns were nowhere to be found, somewhere off in the netherworld. They had been already captured. And then my opponent times out. I still win because this pawn here, which is actually quite close to becoming promoted, we don't know. We don't know what that pawn's going to be. If I promote to bishop at a8, then I'm not sure because that's two bishops, but they're of the same color, so that's insufficient material. I'd say that's probably how that is. If I promote to any other type of piece, be it knight, rook, queen, then my opponent loses due to the timeout. And so most often a pawn is treated as if it had already gotten to be a queen. That's one way to think about it. So what do we have? This was the ending position, and my opponent has the board all the way, right? His king moves to e6, where it can no longer be harried by my bishop on c2, and then where's white gonna move? Actually, no. White's gonna move here. Anyway, it's actually a long forced mate. We see that Torch has analyzed out or calculated out to this is a mate in 16 for black. But I worked the timeout. Getting that check in at the end there is important because when you put a check on your opponent, it interrupts any that takes the most priority because the king must move. So my opponent must decide where to put his king in such a position such an instance. All right. Note too that the game I played before, where I timed out back and forth with the queen, it was against a different opponent. So just point of fact. Here, I timed out against this opponent, and he went on they merry way. And here, I timed my opponent out in a crazy game that we're going to look over. This game was wild. Tons of branches, tons of tactics. Most of them played well. Some of them played in between perfect and well. So let's take a look. Okay. Some early D4 push in an otherwise English opening and English structure, which I've mentioned in the past. I believe that is also it's kind of a system. The English opening is kind of a system, and this looks a lot like a Maroczy bind, but it's also within the English opening or the English system. Knight to c3. Now, not quite this early, but I'm thinking, look, just quickly on this without going into every force. White has such dominant control over the center. White is in clear control over the center. Sometimes once you've established control over the center like this, the most classic thing to do would be to start a pawn storm. I don't think I did in this game. We're going over this quickly, folks, and that's going to be it for tonight. But just note, look, we got a knight having to move to b8. I think he just about has to move there. Is that right? Well, no, but it is the best move. The knight moves to b8, and there's this rather early attack on a queenside castled black king. Isn't that funny? White pushes with queen a7. And there were all these potential tactics and sharp moves and then bad moves, and we kind of got to this position where I think black is best off with rook to d7, and other moves are just not going to be all that great. But just going over this from a bird's eye view here, like this is a seriously jarbled or randomized set of pieces. Not really, but in the way of things, instead of where some games you have this, right? Like we do here on the on White's second rank. That's that happens, right? And you have a king castled and a rook here. These pieces here, Paul de Groot would be glad to know are Dr. Paul de Groot would be glad to know are more weird to a chess player's eye, just a little bit more jarbled. And that usually means a lot more tactics, more difficult tactics. So this is going to be a real fun, crazy game over here. And then these pieces even on the black side outside of that box, this other side is more orderly. So I don't know, 5 and 10 and pick 'em. I guess it's an interesting. It's an interesting arrangement of pieces as early as what early? Oh, now move 23 is not all that early, so we move on. Rook c7 check, sacrificing the exchange because pawn takes c7 is not lights out, but it's definitely the best move, and white holds on to a small edge here. What will we have here? I played bishop to a6. Not even close to being a good move. My thought was, with bishop to a6, the bishops create a barrier against which the black king may not enter, or through which the black king may not enter. And then with the discovered check on the c file, the pawn still holding down d5, I thought, black will move king to d7, and then there's got to be something later on with rook to c7 check and picking up the bishop. There wasn't. Turned out there were no such tactics, and I'm sure Torch has this as bishop to e6 was the way to go. Push the king westward, so to speak, though not directly into the line of attack of the white dark squared bishop, and then a different game ensues. This whole different type of game ensues. Anyway, I played this pretty bad miss with bishop to a6. We went over the main good response, so we'll keep going. And like I said, rook to c7 check had me thinking that I might be able to capture on e7, even after the check on d5. I hope that's what I pursued. Yes, it's the best move, and still clinging on to protection of the e7 bishop. The king moves to f5, and it's just, geez, man, how much, this is Houdini, whether it's Houdini escaping from chains, or Eminem's most recent album, or the great chess engine Houdini. I believe it's available for commercial purchase. It's one of the top engines as such. So, but I played bishop c3 because I thought, when I next play pawn to f4, well, then certainly he'll crack. Captures, bishop captures, stay cool, king. But no, the king would probably capture on e5. That's not cool. That's capturing. Hey, but then I capture on e7 with check, and we have a weird different game where somehow white has scoured 2 pawns for a pawn overall out of that deal. When the king moves, he can threaten on d4. If we move b3 to block the file, then maybe there's a threat against b2 after the king goes to, works his way down there. But all the while, white has captured, we think at some point, the pawn on g7, and white has probably about an extra pawn through all that stuff. That's one line that seemed compelling, and I decided, well, my opponent's move, so my opponent decided, forget all that, rook to c8, and smart. I think that's the right move by my opponent. Moves by my rook find my c4 bishop en prise, so I decided to simplify. Now we're down to, I have no rooks, my opponent has one, and bishop d5 doesn't look like that great a move at first blush. But let's think about long term. What does bishop d5 do? Right? White could have backpedaled to b3, but that stymies the advancement of his own b2 pawn. And leaves black's center more free to start kind of a mobile attempt at promoting on the center files. Instead, I move this pawn bishop to d5. I think this is a very strong move. Just think long term. Who's going to unseat this bishop? With the pawn protecting him, there's only one answer. When the bishop's on d5, there's only one piece that could unseat that bishop. Not me, because I'm controlling the thing, and I could if I chose. I'm not a piece, okay? But only the rook could ever if it came to it, force this bishop to move the Harry out of the way. Only the rook, and that would cost the exchange, or maybe a bishop and a pawn for a rook. Sometimes depends on where other pieces were. So this is, I think this is that's how that is. It's a long bishop to d5 is a structural move, a positional move that has long-term consequences and favors white. With black squared bishop now stuck behind a pawn chain that isn't as mobile as if the bishop were on b3. If bishop's on b3, then at some point, maybe not right away, but at some point there's the idea of d5, and black's dark squared bishop frees himself from behind his king or these pawns. So bishop d5, a good, strong, long-term move. And we're gonna my opponent's pushing on the king side. I played pawn to g3. That might not. I agree with Torch here. That's probably not white's best move. More often we'd want to see pawn to g4, and then if the pawns lock up, they lock up. But we want f and h on the third rank, and the pawn at g4, of course, on the fourth rank. So that might be a better move here than g3, looking mostly just to get out of back rank issues, but it mostly to escape back rank issues. Also, though, after g3, there's the idea of white playing f4 anyway. Right, we play f4, despite the fact that my opponent has beefed up his defense on f4, then probably the g takes f4, g takes f4, and it's this pawn can't recapture, at least not right now, because of the pin that my dark squared bishop is throwing against the pawn towards black's king. So you could imagine even from there, then f takes e5. I probably wouldn't do that because I freed the dark squared bishop, but pushing pawn to f5 is an idea as well. f4 is some kind of miss here. The Torch wants me to get my connected pass pawns on the queen side rolling before anything else. That might, on second thought, that makes sense, because where could black's counterattack come from with all with his pawns, all these pawns, like in this sort of like semi-smiley face kind of position or location? They're all blocking his more aggressive pieces. Even the king has an aggressive piece in the endgame. They're all blocked or stymied in one way or another. So these pawns on the queen side would really, and with both my dark squared bishop and my light squared bishop to keep control over either color of square, that these pawns really, these are the story here. This is the whole, that's the game. I played f4, and I guess this was just out of sort of natural tendency. I would I can more calculate with open board, maybe. It wasn't the greatest move, frankly. It brought into all this counterplay. We've got an active rook to tend with. He could have, there were times where I think he might have had pot shots against h2, maybe not, and I made the game a lot more difficult for myself along those lines. And here's just, I'm playing to time my opponent out, and I got it in the nick of time. But I think it's be interesting to see where Torch had Torch is warning me against pawn to f4. Okay, right. This is white's turn to move, so we're gonna play from here and see if does white roll rather more easily if we take time to play pawn to a4. Okay. We're not moving that. This is stable. Okay. I saw earlier that depicted was bishop to a5. I'm not sure I would have come up with that move. Yeah, alright. I might have bishop to a5 and then if rook c5 then pawn to b4. So instead, Torch is throwing the idea of, I think we're gonna swap. Yeah, that's White's gonna have a long-term bind. Oh, no, game over. So this is fun, right? See the rook on a7 is completely hemmed in. There's a number of ways for White to proceed here. This is called a good waiting move. B4. It's actually a strength. It's a waiting move, but it's definitely a strengthening one at that. And we'll see if which decoy Black hunts down. I think so. This decoy counts because it puts this a7 square under attack. And then that's what we have to here. Bishop. Sorry, queen. So. I think the computer is allowing the extra queen because it increases the possibility of White stalemating Black. Here's the trick. You really should, in tournament games, you probably play queen to b8 and calculate it out. If you're low on time in an online game, you pre-move queen to a8 check. Right, so that's predictable. Yeah, king moves to b4, then queen to b8 check. King's got to move somewhere, or maybe a4, but then queen from c7 to a7 checkmate. That's one way to do it. If you're in pressure and time. If you're not comfortable with that, then there's a way that I kind of prefer. I think this way is actually better. So I use this way, and that's just to make sure that Black has. If I move queen to b8, I should say queen at d to b8. If I move queen at d to b8, does my opponent have at least one square? And he does. He can float between these four squares pretty much ad nauseum. So I'll play queen to b8, and then queen to a7 becomes checkmate. That's it. We're almost finished. It's almost dinner time. I gotta eat some nice food. Maybe I'll cook something up. I'm not sure what yet. We'll think of something, I'm sure. some of these, I'm just going to close certain windows. That one's thinking. This one seems a lot like this one, right? Yes, so let's close this window. Don't know where this was from earlier somehow yet. So this is the analysis, this is the practice, this goes to practice. And this was against a different opponent entirely. Okay, we'll leave that be. All right, so this, I believe, is the game we just finished. Yes. Okay. So accurate to the extent of with this whole end game. It looks like it's about 40% of the overall moves, and then we're accurate to the low 80s. So that's kind of fun. That's cool, man. Considering this, just how crazy the game was, how wild the tactics and difficult to find the best lines were. So I'm really glad to have played this game, and that's it. All right. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Have a great night.